Hi, it's me, Chris Harder, and welcome back to Showboys, the podcast bringing you a glittery, gritty, full frontal glimpse into the world of boylesque. What is boylesque? We're gonna find out. You know, when I host shows, I always like to say it takes a village to help us take off our clothes. By which, of course, I mean everyone who works at the venue, especially the front of house staff, the backstage crew, and the producers. They are the people who make sure the show is a success. And let's just say my guest today has had plenty of experience working in the front, the back, and the big top. For 6 years, he was the general manager of the legendary gay bathhouse and nightclub Man's Country in Chicago, created by the late Chuck Renslow, where he did everything from smoothing Sally Rand's feathers to shushing a very inebriated Paul Lynde to even erecting an ice skating rink. He was also the co-founder and president of the Chicago Gay Alliance between 1971 and 1973, where he helped to create Chicago's first lesbian and gay community center. He has been involved with a plethora of gay rights activist groups, including the Chicago Gay Health Project, the Gay Rights National Lobby, the National Association of People with AIDS, and the Names Project, just to name a few. He was the co-founder and vice president of Backdoor Promotions, love that name, and, word has it, he can occasionally be spotted cavorting with Leatherman in full clown face. Please welcome to the Showboys stage, Gary Chichester. Hi, Gary.
Hi, Chris. Thank you.
My pleasure. Did I get everything right there?
Sounds pretty good. Yeah. One thing that I'm really awesome involved with for the past 30 years is the Chicago LGBT Hall of Fame. I'm a Chicago native, and sometimes we don't get our due right as far as history is concerned. So I try to, history is a favorite topic of mine, and making sure that it's correctly quoted.
Absolutely. For those people who have never heard of Man's Country before, what was it, and what could a person expect on a typical night at Man's Country?
Man's Country was opened in 1974. It was one of two clubs, one in New York and one in Chicago. It was originally conceived by two gentlemen that owned the Club Baths here in Chicago as partners, and they decided that they would open up another, company, another, bathhouse. So Man's Country opened in '74, and it was different than the one in New York, which was much more geared towards, sexual fantasy. I always think of Man's Country Chicago as being like a cruise ship. People would arrive and they'd be taken on a journey. We had entertainment, we had socializing, we had sex, we had everything you can imagine to make you, kind of relieve yourself of the worries of the world, and you're taken out of all that. And we went on for 30, more than that actually, it's about 50 years. And it was a magic space. We had a music hall, which we loved to name it the Man's Country Music Hall after the Rockefeller Center Music Hall. Because there was, well, difference in size, but it was also, we produced some really fabulous shows there. And you could, on a slow night, people would be there for hardcore sex. On a busier night, you could see great entertainment, 1 minute, and the next minute you can go down and do what you need to do to meet new people. It was just, we'd wake everybody up at 8 o'clock in the morning again and serve a continental breakfast and get them all going again. And, that way we'd wake them up and they have a chance to do one last fling, and then out the door they went so we could start the whole new day again.
Wow. That is incredible. I love it. So you give them some silver dollar pancakes and send them around for one more lap, and then they'd head back out into the world again.
And they, we'd walk out in the daylight and they're, looking with this silly grin on their face.
I can't think of any place like that right now in the United States that does everything you just described. I mean, there's plenty of sex clubs, but a show and a breakfast, I think that's pretty hard to come by. So you were partly responsible, if not totally responsible, for bringing the world famous Sally Rand to perform at the Man's Country Music Hall. What was she like to work with, and how did that come about?
She was the most lovely woman you've ever wanted to meet. When we finally met her and brought her into Man's Country, she was still performing her fan dance and her bubble dance at the age of 74. But she was cautious. She was hardened a little bit. Uh, when we first talked to her, we were always basically the entertainment thing at Man's Country was always, mostly when people, gay men of a certain age would, wanted entertainment, they would always end up seeing a pantomime show of men dressed as women at various clubs. And that was kind of like what the entertainment menu was like back in the day. So we always offered things that you normally don't get to see. Sally Rand, well, actually it didn't start with Sally Rand. We thought, well, how many, gay men, have never seen a strip show? So we thought, let's bring a stripper in. So we would look for Tempest Storm, and we talked to her agent, and he said, "Oh, you don't want to deal with Tempest. She's a bitch." Oh, okay. But he suggested that we look into Sally Rand. And Sally Rand, she was the person that she traveled with 7 trunks, which included lighting and costumes and all this. And the funny thing is, she always performed in the nude. So why did she have well, she did the clothing thing because of interviews. She loved to talk about her life. She was uh, married to the actor Ronald Colman, and that Hollywood aspects of it. And she
Hmm.
had just back in the 30s at the Chicago Century of Progress World's Fair, she was on the Midway as an entertainer, and she was arrested 7 times in one day.
Yes.
Her famous line was, the rand is quicker than the eye." So we touched base with her, and she said, "Well, I have to send out my people to approve the room." It turns out that she had booked in Kensington, Kentucky, I think it was, a club called the Brass Donkey. Well, when she got down there, she realized it was called the Brass Ass, and it was a totally different thing than what she expected.
Oh
So
God.
if she wasn't familiar with the club, she would go out there. She didn't want to be billed as a stripper. She wanted to be as a dancer, and her music was classical. Her lighting was fabulous, and she has really. If anyone gets a chance to see any of her old videos, she was just unbelievably magic, and she
Hmm.
fit right in. This elderly couple came in and to prove the room, and they'll love the room because the ceilings were high enough for her bubbles, these huge bubbles which were bigger than she was, and the fan dance, of course. And then she would, so her act was 4.5 minutes maybe long. So what do we do for the rest of the 45-minute show? Well, let's sit her down and just have her tell stories. Well, those sit downs lasted an hour and a half to 2 hours because people were just, and when you have men sitting there in towels,
Uh-huh.
the things going on in the building, which you think would take their attention away from this elderly 75-year-old lady, but she kept them right under control.
Yeah. Well, you said she was wise to Man's Country, so she knew that she was performing in a place where guys were going to hook up. Did she ever say anything about that, or did?
She referred to it, but never in any kind of, without animosity or anything. But the room with everybody reclining, that was something about Man's Country. If you didn't grab their attention, you'd lose them because they'd either walk off, and there's some people that could care less, and they'd be doing it right there. And she'd look around, and there'd be 2 people under a towel over here. You know exactly what they were doing, and she just went on with her dance. And for the most part, we kept crowds in that room asking her questions for maybe an hour after the show, and there was truly an interest about talking to this woman. about her history and, Chicago in the 30s and, how LA in the 30s, everything. She think that the Queen's just laughed up.
Yeah, well, for people who don't know, Sally Rand truly is a Chicago institution. She
Hmm.
made her debut in 1933, like you were saying, at the World's Fair. And I just love that she had a renaissance practically, then again in the 70s at Man's Country.
We were, I think part of one of your questions is, how we became legitimized, and because Man's Country was an old German club up in the Andersonville area, and it was pretty residential up there. And people aren't stupid; they realize the fags are coming. I had joined the Block Club, group, and went to a couple meetings, and just to be nicey nice, and
Sure.
wasn't gonna hide anything from them. That's the worst thing you can do.
Mm-hmm.
Finally, this one older guy, kind of redneck, he's, well, Sally Rand's gonna be there. If she can play Man's Country, it's all right with me. Yeah. And that was basically how we got the okay from the local, block club, to go ahead with the whole thing. And, well, we're going to go ahead anyhow, but at least peace in the neighborhood.
Wow, yeah, thank you. That was one of my questions. And I came across it because I was reading Leatherman, The Legend of Chuck Renslow by Tracy Baim and Owen Keehnen, who you mentioned
Hmm.
earlier. That's so, well, look, here we go. Once again, burlesque. It unites people from all walks of life.
Yeah, oh, it's just, and then she never considered herself a stripper,
Mm-hmm.
even though she's been compared. She was a dancer, and she just happened to do it in the nude. So,
Right.
Bruce Vilanch, I'm sure you're familiar with Bruce Vilanch,
Yeah.
came for the Tribune at the time, and he was going to do a feature on Sally Rand. Well, I don't know who beat them to it, but before that, maybe the Tuesday before his article was supposed to hit on that Friday, was a front page story about Sally Rand playing, Man's Country, the private men's club up in Andersonville, on Clark Street. The phone would ring off the, wall. People, oh, my husband wants to come and see, we'd like to get tickets, reservation. Well, it's a men's club. Oh, well, my husband would love to come. How do we get it? Well, he has to be a member. Well, how do you, do that? And so all these questions. Well, you have
Mm-hmm.
to be referred to and blah, da, 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 da. And they just didn't take the hint, so they kept pressing. So the phone was going nuts. The people that were working the front desk and everything, freaking out. And so then finally, Bruce Vilanch's article hit on a Friday in the entertainment section between two Disney ads for movies. Front page of the entertainment section, and it was Rub a Dub Dub, 400 Men in a Tub. It was the title of and the phone stopped because he spelled it out.
Yeah. Take that, Disney. That's great.
There was a large group called the Lincoln Park Lagooners. They were the gay volleyball team, and they ended up being a very social group through the 70s and that. And they started doing, in fact, a good friend of mine was a designer who knew all the designers in town, and he'd organized this event, and it was basically Winter Carnival was the group, and then they'd always do something else. Well, they were coming up with their second or third production at the Aragon Ballroom, and it was going to be cruising the Nile. So it's like it was all Egyptian, everything, and they had Sally Rand was going to lead the parade of people, through the Aragon Ballroom, and she had been not feeling well. She was getting older, and her
Mm-hmm.
health was deteriorating. My partner at the time, Patrick, we signed him as her wrangler, and to make sure that she was okay. And she was like, oh, if you looked at her, there's that poor old woman. But as soon as those spotlights hit her, she was on. I never saw anything so professional in my life.
Yeah, that's so interesting that you say that because a lot of the older burlesque legends, as we call them, that I've worked with, it's the same thing. During the day they might seem, I guess, like you said, a little more feeble or just that their health is in the best shape. But as soon as they get on stage, it's like it all comes back to them. there's this underwear party that happens on Fire Island every year. And I used to work for it, and a lot of burlesque performers have as well through the years. But it's also, it's an orgy that's happening, and then there's a stage show. And one time, my poor friend, who's this beautiful burlesque dancer, stepped up to go on stage, and she walked through a circle jerk, I guess, by accident. And I think someone came on her shoe right before she actually got to the stage. So I'm assuming nothing like that happened to Sally Rand while she was in your care.
There was a lot of respect for Sally back in those days. It was, and nothing was ever said, but people really took them under their arm and they loved her.
Mm-hmm.
And they weren't going to, it was truly, she had control of her audience.
You were saying earlier before I hit record that the music hall was this magic room. Can you say more about that? What made it the magic room, or why do you think it just worked so well?
Well, when we went to open up Man's Country, was a three-story venue, and the upstairs, which we hadn't gone into because Chuck didn't really know what he wanted to do with it, was an old lodge hall. So the stage, small little stage, nice size room. It was just the perfect size, and because it was a lodge hall, it had vibes about that. And the building, the venue itself used to be a gambling room. We would go into, where the some of the public areas had walls that would lift up, and you could see the bases of the slot machines were still there. And it had a history. And what could be better than to have, then all of a sudden, the queers come in and go on for another 30 years. Lighting was, we used to think, there's a group of us that were working there that we fantasize over, well, we got to talk Chuck into making this into a dance room. But people don't dance nude, maybe they will. So we didn't really know what to expect, but other than we already had started an entertainment, you know, line, all the where we would, always bring people in. We copied sort of like the Continental Baths and the Bette Midler thing. There were other bathhouses around the country that we take the best aspects that we thought of those venues and bring them into, Chicago and have it all there for enjoyment, and that really worked for us. Finally, we said, can we open up this room? So the year New Year's Eve between 1974 and 1975 was our deadline to open up this new room. We had entertainers all over the city that for the opening. The Bearded Lady, if you're familiar with the Bearded Lady, who used to be part of the cast at the Bistro nightclub. We send out a car, limousine to go pick these people up, perform at Man's Country, then take them back to, their evening job. And we made a really good rapport with people in the business. So that only helped us word of mouth and getting, there used to be the place to go. Plus, that would be a nice crowd to come in at 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning. So it was always something going on. And we got a reputation. We've had people there from Rudolph Nureyev to, Paul Lynde, a few others. I've been in many clubs and Paul Lynde would walk in and he'd always be a little, two sheets to the wind. But something very intimidating about Man's Country. He was like a little baby. He was just, his eyes were wide open and he didn't believe something like this went on. But then again, he was being escorted in by Wayland Flowers and Madame. And Wayland was pretty, and Madame for that matter, were pretty wise to what was going on at Man's Country. Matter of fact, Wayland used to stay at Man's Country instead of putting him up in a hotel somewhere. He preferred to be at, the venue. And you'd go down at 2 o'clock in the morning or so and go down to the television room and, the shows have been over for a couple hours and all of a sudden you look over there and there's Madame sitting in her hair up in curlers and in a chenille bathrobe watching television and entertaining people, all the time. It was truly funny.
Yeah, that is hilarious. For people who aren't familiar with Wayland Flowers and Madame, can you tell us a little bit about, well, especially who Wayland was?
Wayland Flowers was a Southern boy from in Georgia, Waycross, Georgia. and I went on to New York, became this puppeteer. He eventually made it to nighttime television. He had a show called Madame's Place, and then on to Las Vegas, and just everywhere. He was, quite. His line was, "This Madame's not a puppet, and I'm no fucking dummy." And it was he didn't even try to cover up the moving of his mouth because you didn't pay attention to that. The way the puppet was constructed, your focus would be on Madame constantly. In fact, when he came in for sound checks and that, first thing he did was he asked for a microphone. We would put a microphone out, and from then on, Madame took over everything about the sound check. That was kind of scary when it first happened, but it turned out okay. That's Wayland.
Oh, wow. And also Wayland Flowers used to perform at the Eagle in New York, right? Way back, or at leather
And
bars
way
in New
back,
York?
yeah, he was on the pool table. Wayland would come out, and if he's in town, he'd always show up with Madame on his arm, entertaining no matter where he went. It was just he was there to make people laugh, and he did an excellent job.
Yeah, so again, just goes to show you, you never know what you're gonna see at the leather bar. Might be a daddy in head to toe leather, or it might be a puppet on a pool table, so
Mhm.
come with an open mind. You also worked with, besides Wayland Flowers and Sally Rand, people like Larry Paulette and the Switchblades, Tequila Sunrise, Franne Golde, Barclay Shaw. Who were some of your favorite performers and what were their acts like?
Well, Franny was our answer to Bette Midler. She started out as a young woman who was singing with a man by the name of Tony Zito. So it used to be Franny and Zoe was the name of the act. And then
Mm,
she became involved with the manager and love interest, Dennis Mayoff, and he kind of saw what we were doing. By this time, we were starting to get write-ups in Variety, and then he was savvy to what was going on, and he knew for that kind of act, gay following is only beneficial. So Franny would come in and just beautiful voice. She wrote her own music. In fact, she's gone on to write for Diana Ross and for Commodores, and just
mm.
this whole list of people that she has been writing music for over the years. And she was our special woman. One night she had one song that was ended up in a big gospel kind of finish, and Dennis kind of his motto is it's not done till it's overdone, but he literally brought in a gospel choir from the south side of Chicago. And for this one number, we had, I'd say, 30 choir members in robes and everything that just appeared. Well, we were stashing choir people and crowds and everything all over the place. But it was a great surprise when all of a sudden this crowd of chorus people come singing out. It was energy was incredible.
And again, this was at a gay bathhouse where the crowd is pretty much nude or in towels, and then all of a
Yes.
sudden it's surrounded by a giant gospel choir. That's incredible.
Yeah, it was, and like, okay, another job, here we go. Yeah, it was pretty magical. That's how that room becomes so mad because no matter what we wanted to do, it was so easy. Barclay Shaw, before he moved on to Vegas, he came to Man's Country to test the waters of his magic act. So he, added to that aspect of it too.
Paul Lynde of Hollywood Squares fame, it's been said that he was intimidated coming to Man's Country. Why do you think that was?
Well, I had experiences with him and I heard other experiences as he was usually very drunk by later on, and he had a very bad tongue on him. He would and he was always wanted to be the head of the attention in a mean way.
Mm,
And oh, here we go. And then we operated a club called Center Stage. It was Chuck's Disco Cabaret Club, and Paul Lynde showed up there, and it was 2 o'clock, and we weren't going to extend it because there was nothing. Big club, you just don't invite people to stay with nothing really going on. Well, he wanted another drink, and so we brought him to this apartment that was there, and gave him, something to drink. But then he wanted to continue the party. And we said, no, we have to get going now, because we were only a 2 o'clock bar. Oh, then he got it. I'm going to close this place. And, don't you know who I am? Yes, we know who you are. And he has so many circumstances of just being mean to people. And I always consider it part of his loneliness and, just where he was, because he wasn't really openly gay, but he really was queer. So we ended up, doing that. But then when he got to Man's Country, Wayland had worked for us numerous times, and Wayland kind of owned the place, and we loved Wayland. And Wayland shows up with him, a young rent boy who was with them, and Paul Lynde. And they show up, and so we escorted him right in. Well, I don't know if they explained to Paul what was going on, because his eyes just opened up when he saw these, and people were in all kinds of dress, from naked to towels to little short pants to flowing pants to this whole assortment is a costume party as well.
Mm-hmm.
So he just was totally blown away that this was all going on. And he just nervously, I've never seen him so quiet before. Usually he's very loud. And, that was just, he was in shock. I think he liked it.
Well, hopefully someone filled his mouth with something, so kept him preoccupied while he was there.
Yeah. So I'm not sure who the rent boy belonged to, but, maybe it was just part of the perks.
Right. Did you ever have any male strippers or male burlesque performers there?
We didn't really need it. We had just look around the room.
Right.
People were doing their act all over. We had huge pillows instead of chairs. It was like a Roman orgy constantly.
True. I guess it does start to become a little redundant. I mean, there's been a few times that I performed in places like that where, yeah, it's hard to compete as a male stripper when, over in the corner, there's two guys who are already like giving probably a much more exciting show anyway.
Well,
So
it was more real.
yeah, exactly. In the flesh, literally.
And then we had people that used to make a living out of risque. If you're familiar with Rusty Warren, when I grew up, our parents would have these adult records, comedy records, of which Rusty Warren sang "Knockers Up" and a few others. She was pretty incredible. Well, she was there, and met her. I didn't even realize she was a lesbian until we actually hired her and brought her in, and she became a friend. And we did things like that. Larry Paulette. I had gone to New York to see, theater. I love New York's theater. And there was a show called Let My People Come. And in that show, it was like a review of various things. And there was one act or one song just called I'm Gay, sung by Larry Paulette. And it was quite moving. This was down in the Village when I first saw it. So he went on the road, and we brought him in, and it was Larry Paulette and the Swishblades.
I was just looking up one of my favorite songs from that kind of era of adult records is My Pussy Belongs to Daddy. And I don't believe it was Rusty Warren, who actually made an appearance at the Burlesque Hall of Fame several years ago and talked about her life working in burlesque lounges and also kind of making these like tongue-in-cheek, titillating records. Something else I want to ask you. So you were mentioning, of course, there are other bathhouses who had entertainment. I've heard of everything being called the KY circuit. Is that true? And burlesque performers like Sally Rand, especially in their heyday, would have traveled on multiple burlesque circuits around the country. Was there a pretty active KY circuit, and did you work with other bathhouses, or how did that come about?
It just the KY circuit didn't really refer to bathhouses in general. It was a definite recognition to the LGBT element. A lot of small cabarets across the country were part of the KY circuit, just because KY meaning queer, the gay circuit. So there were very few bathhouses that actually had entertainment.
Mm-hmm.
The Kansas City Club would do it because Wanda Lust, who was our resident drag queen and technical person, eventually moved down to Kansas City and took that aspect down to their bathhouse. in down there, and so they would do they touch on entertainment. But we were probably the premier bathhouse that provided entertainment after the Continental closed down.
Wow, and so KY, not to sound like a dumb baby gay, but KY meant queer, or why did it
Well, it would
have
be like calling it the lube circuit now.
okay, yeah, that's what I thought. The Lube Lounge,
Or
that's
the
what
spit circus in some circles.
okay, okay, the Spit Circus, love it. You were also, the co-founder and vice president of Backdoor Promotions. What kind of acts and entertainers did you feature there, or were those the same acts that you were bringing to, Man's Country?
Well, we would, the cost involved in like recording artists, were not in our budget at Man's Country. With Backdoor Promotions, we would basically focused ourselves on working within the LGBT community at that time and doing things like some of the street fairs and booking the stages. So we'd book a lot of the singers that could work on tracks and
Mhm.
that would publicize. So it was more street festival entertainment and setting up the street festivals themselves from along Market, Halsted Street and Lakeview East. And if you're familiar with Chicago, those are predominantly queer areas, where they have street festivals.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what we did with that Backdoor Promotions. We would do fundraising events and basically get them to make more money for them. So and that was kind of our way of giving back.
Well, that's actually a great segue, because like I was saying earlier, you have worked so much for the LGBT community and I've been on a variety of boards, worked for a number of charities. How did you balance all of that? And what's been some of your, if not proudest achievements, what's been some of your best memories from doing all of that work?
Well, one thing that really helped was my partner back in the early 70s, late 60s, early 70s. We were together. In fact, I just lost him.
Mm.
It was terrible, but he moved to San Francisco. We were together for 6 years, and he decided he wanted to join a commune. And I'm going, Richard, I'm really not the commune type.
Yeah.
So he moved on to San Francisco. In fact, we still talked and saw each other up until his death just 2 months ago. And just a magnificent, wonderful man. So when I was founding that, I had basically an apartment full of furniture, which he didn't want. You can't really move all that furniture into the commune. So I was looking for the right size apartment for kind of keep things I wanted, and going through that whole transition period. And my favorite bar at the time was the Gold Coast, which was the leather bar of Chicago, owned by Chuck Renslow. And I went in and, needing some extra money. I said, Chuck, how would, do you have anything open for a bartender? I had never tended bar. I didn't even drink. And, oh, okay, we'll put you in there. So it started out 2 nights a week. And then before you knew it, I was working full time at the bar, and I still had my other job, which I was working full time at. It was, just all of a sudden something's got to go, and then I ended
Mhm.
up quitting the other job. And Chuck took me under his wing, and he also, in addition to, I eventually moved into managing the Gold Coast, and he basically kind of was my mentor, and I was his protege when it came to politics in the city and nationwide, actually. So that was a really great thing to, he would, oh, yes, you can do that, and you can do that, and here, why don't you do this? And, he'd really get me egged on to working and giving back to the community through, politics and that. So, we did the Anita Bryant picket back in the early 70s in Chicago when she was on her orange juice thing.
Right.
And, so many things that, we were the first March on Washington. He really opened up my eyes to what politics was all about and how you can go and make, do with what you're doing and get the word out. Because again, if you lose your history and everything, you kind of lose your existence. That's one reason I'm involved with the Chicago LGBT Hall of Fame is we really document over the past 30 years Chicago has a really vibrant LGBT, history,
Yeah.
and kids don't know it. They just only know that they want to go to the Halsted Street to get a cocktail and pick up a dude, or a female, a woman. And so we end up drumming history into people's minds. And it's kind of exciting when they open up and realize, oh yeah, well, before the 1970, there was no dancing in the bars here. That was a thing that we had to take and do before you. And then that led to the next thing. People say, "Oh, dancing is just dancing." Well, but that was all part of it. It was like dancing led to uh, job discrimination and housing discrimination
Mhm.
and everything else. And we ended up groups of people here in Chicago were instrumental in passing human rights ordinances, and eventually I ended up on the mayor's advisory council for LGBT issues and doing our work. And we actually had his ear.
I was curious, how were you able to keep Man's Country going, and how did the shows did it feel like they became even more important and influential, especially during the beginning of the AIDS crisis? How did the shows continue?
Well, they changed. When I left Man's Country to go to a club by the name of Center Stage, which was a large disco, club with cabaret, included as well. And Man's Country kind of went in a different direction. They were featuring. Chuck got involved with the Chicago Meatpackers, which was a all-male performing group. So they would change the staging to showers was installed so that people could take a shower in front of the crowd and everything. So it's a different aspect. It was more like a burlesque aspect or male strippers, than the talent that we were featuring prior to that.
Okay, so did it feel like it was more Chippendales?
Well, yeah, I guess in a little raunchier way, I guess.
Sure,
Yeah.
sure. So that was after you left the club. Did you ever see any of the Chicago Meatpacker shows?
I as actually I was handling their bookings for a while, but it wasn't me. They're more temperamental than other folks. Who's getting more stage time? Who's their egos were as large as their penises.
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, I work mostly with burlesque performers of all genders, but I used to work a lot with more kind of straight up male strippers, and they can be sometimes the biggest divas in the room, no matter the size of their dick. So,
Right. Oh, true, true. Yeah. Yeah, some of the guys were really good, and I had a trouble understanding queer for pay, gay for pay type of thing. And they were there, and they were actually probably a little more harder to deal with than female divas. They were all divas themselves, but they're big hunky guys, that high maintenance.
and you were saying, were they all gay for pay strippers?
Not all of them, but
Mhm.
that attracts some. Matter of fact, my niece ended up getting married a second marriage, and it turned out that her husband had a friend. I don't know how they met, maybe in the service or something, but he knew one of the guys that were part of the troupe. I thought, okay, yeah,
I love it. Well, they met in some kind of service, whatever service it was.
yeah, yeah.
I was going to ask you too. I just have a few more questions here. So, when we were talking about Circus Vargas, I was just thinking, the circus has always been a refuge for LGBTQ people and folks that just didn't fit into their communities. When you were moonlighting as Buttonstick Clown, did you notice any queer activity behind the big top?
Not really. The circus folks were, you had two classes of people. You had the talent, and then you had the roadies. And the roadies is kind of what attracted me, but you were afraid to get even close. you know? And then, so I didn't really run away to the circus looking for sex. It was just something that the circus owners was place. His name was Vargas, Cliff Vargas.
Hmm.
He used to manage a kind of a after hours everything went club out in Forest Park, I believe it was. On the edge of drugs and sex and everything. 24 hours. It was dirt floors. then he made money, and then he went off and bought this circus that started touring. And then you had the circus manager who was gay, and he was in a relationship with the ringmaster,
Mm.
and and they were really nice guys, and they were into leather. So I was working at the Gold Coast at the time, and they'd always show up, down there, especially if they weren't moving the circus. They'd do maybe 10 different locations around the city, but if they didn't have a teardown night, they were able to come downtown. And so they finally said, well, why don't you come out and join the circus, or come to the circus? And they'd always put us in the presidential box, and we get kinds of people. And just the circus is the oldest form of entertainment,
Mm-hmm.
and to see how it all comes together is amazing. And the whistle, you think, oh, that's part of the ringmaster. Well, that's a signal for the next act to line up, and all this. So it was like there's a sequence to everything.
Mm-hmm.
So I said, to both, their both names were Joe's, and I said, is it possible to come and just kind of stand back, and see how this is all staged from the back side? Because that's where it gets my adrenaline going, is seeing all this coming together. And oh, better than that, how would you like to be a clown? Well, my first partner, Richard, we always used to joke about running away to Sarasota and going to clown college.
Yeah.
My chance to run away to the circus. So for about 4 years, they'd come to town, and I'd set up an appointment to literally run away to the circus and play, various spots out in the suburbs, and then become part of Clown Alley. And it was fun. So they'd help me with my makeup until I learned how to do it, and then the buttons went on to become a charitable person. If there was
Mm-hmm.
a AIDS benefit or something, buttons would take a pie in the face for this or do that for that, and it became a celebrity. Plus, he'd also go sit in the bar, cigarette and a drink in his hand,
Right.
slightly askew.
Well, I should say I've met a lot of clowns, but I've never been picked up by a clown in a gay bar. So,
Oh, you see, Buttons used to do very well at Touche, because being a white-faced clown, it's really stood out amongst all the black leather.
oh yes, yes, I bet. Well, on that note, because you have worked in so many different capacities in the entertainment industry, I was just curious, what to you is the definition of a great entertainer?
Somebody who gives their all and transforms themselves and you as an observer. Talent. We've worked with people that couldn't sing for shit, but they were truly entertainment. The timing of jokes or this or that would always kind of come together. They were masterful, and I was just lucky that we were able to do it. Did you ever get a chance to see that room before they tore it down?
So I went to Man's Country right before it closed with a friend of mine, a hookup, and we were playing around. And I think I lost him at some point. He was wandering around the rooms, and I kind of just stumbled into the ballroom. I didn't even know it was there, or the music hall, I should say. And nothing was happening, but it just immediately I just thought of all the people and acts that must have filled that room at one point. It felt like I was surrounded by ghosts, but really really cool queer ghosts. I was wondering, can you share maybe as a parting anecdote for our guests one of your favorite moments of working with Sally Rand, or for that matter, any performers who graced that
Hmm.
stage?
There's so many great stories I can't think of. Probably salute to Wanda Lust, who was, his name was Stephen L. Jones, and he really was my first drag friend. And he was just a wonderful person and talented, and make you laugh.
Hmm.
And he would do some great things. One year we thought, he let me know that he could ice skate.
Oh,
Ice skate. That would be kind of wild, because he did one of these events for cruising the Nile and the Lincoln Park Lagooners. They did an ice rink here, and there was Wanda in one of Sonia Henny's old fur, fox stoles, and it was quite, for people that knew the history, it was pretty amazing that he had Sonia Henny's, fox wrap on. So we would, do all these things with him. We finally decided, we started Wanda. Didn't do a lot of regular shows, but we'd feature him in guest spots. So one year we did Holidays, DAZE, on ice.
Mm-hmm.
And we had the whole cast, all the employees of Man's Country had a part in it if they wanted to. So we actually brought in and built it was a simulated ice skating rink made of plexiglass and silicone spray that you could actually skate on.
Wow.
So we, it was quite the thing, and we produced Holidays on Ice, and it was just so much fun. We had everybody from Marlene Dietrich was a favorite of Chuck Renslow's, so she does a song called "Little Drummer Boy." So we had one of our queens dressed up on a walker with skate blades on it,
Mm-hmm.
and doing Marlene Dietrich's, rendition of Little Drummer Boy as one of the acts. And, so we did all these, takeoffs on different things. And that was pretty much a lot of fun. It was just on, producing our own shows was, the lighting and, the whole thing. And it was pretty entertaining.
Yeah, that sounds amazing. That just reminded me, there's a burlesque performer by the name of El Dorado who does these ice skating acts. I don't know if maybe it's a similar setup for her ice skating stage, but again, I think that just speaks to the show quality at Man's Country and the production value that went into these performances. I mean, it wasn't just a little strip and towel show, right?
No, it's just I don't know if you're familiar with the musical group named Gotham. That they were old, not old. They were people that were in the stage, theater business, and they were tired of doing, auditions and everything. So they put together an act called Gotham. It was managed by the same people that did Manhattan Transfer, and so the quality was really good. They harmonized. Matter of fact, they emceed Man's Country for like the 4 years in a row, and they were amazing. And Gary Herb and Johnny and Michael and what an entertaining, fabulous group to entertain. And they would come in and we'd build sets around it. We were lucky that the stage wasn't huge, so we didn't have to go through a lot of construction in order to make something like that work. It's sort of like building a dollhouse stage, but with the right lighting and the right, everything scaled to that point was, easy, not easy to do, but not difficult to do. And it really created a wonderful, and we had a great lighting system. The person that helped us design it, we had a great sound system.
One more question here. Something I've been thinking about a lot, especially since it's officially Pride Month now. What do you think is something that younger queer generations can learn from? I hate to say the word elder, but I use it respectfully, but from older queer people who've been around the block more.
They need to, I come from a spot where you couldn't dance in the city of Chicago without it being considered lewd behavior. 1961, Illinois became the first person to get rid of the sodomy laws. So we have a really vibrant history here.
Mm-hmm.
Dancing and Jim Flint, who owns the Baton Show Lounge, was working downtown, and it was, we ended up picketing where he used to work at the Normandy, which was a mob influence, but it was large enough to have dancing. So we went, down there, and we're sending people to the Baton, which was recently opened, and it was just something you need to know your history.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of kids today don't realize how much the elders really identify. So I've been with the Chicago LGBT Hall of Fame for 30 some years. And my passion for that is teaching history,
Mm-hmm.
and letting people know what their roots were. Some people really like it. Some people could care less. They're too busy getting the next cocktail or hooking up with the next trick. And so we have to keep pounding the fact of learn your heritage, especially now, because if you don't know your heritage, you are going to be lost. This thing last night at the Holocaust Museum was about a nightclub in Berlin in the 30s called El Dorado, and it was kind of a cabaret type place,
Hmm.
where anything went. But this didn't stop the Nazis from putting people in, concentration camps. And if we don't watch ourselves, we're gonna, back when Trump was first elected, we said, oh, here we go. They're gonna take this marriage away from us. They're gonna do this. Oh no, that'll never happen. Well, maybe marriage is still there, but right now our drag community, which was on the forefront of our liberation, and our
Hmm.
trans community are taking the brunt of all this bullshit. So we need to fight back and resist, what's happening in Florida, Texas, Tennessee, all of it. It's really important.
Yeah, absolutely. I was just thinking, I had a great teacher once who told me history doesn't repeat itself, but it does rhyme. And I just, you said it so much more eloquently than me, but there's so many things happening right now that even if they don't feel like they directly affect you, by which I mean any gay person listening to this, they're affecting someone in the queer community. And it's important that we all truly band together and speak out and step up to the plate and make sure that everyone in our queer community is protected.
Exactly. It's so important, and people need to realize that. I go out and have sex. I'm not saying that's not important, because it is.
Oh, yeah.
But learn your history. The Chicago History Museum, as a matter of fact, before the pandemic, used to do a regular monthly um, program called Out at CHM. Chicago History Museum. I get my acronyms correct. And they did one about the first march in Chicago. And it was really, I thought, well, I'm going to go because people aren't going to want to hear this. And the place was packed, and it was so rewarding to see the interest that the group that was assembled there on knowing their history.
Gary, thank you so much for taking time to talk with me. I'm always in awe of the people I get to interview. A lot of the times they're contemporaries of mine, but especially like someone like yourself who has done so much in their life and also so much, especially for queer people. It really is an honor. So thank you.
Well, thank you, Chris. It was most enjoyable. I love thinking back of those days. It really some good memories.
All right. Thank you so much for listening to another episode of Showboys. And you know what? As a special treat, if you'd like to hear a couple more of Gary Chichester's stories, stick around after the closing credits. Either way, I hope you have a great gay pride, and we'll see you next week. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to Showboys. If you enjoyed this episode, please like, subscribe, and leave a review wherever you listen to your podcasts. And if you didn't like it,
you are a whore, darling.
Were you in New York when they did the restaging of Boys in the Band on Broadway a couple years ago?
I was, but I didn't see it, unfortunately.
I saw it originally back in the 60s, and it's off Broadway. And then when I came back, I had to go see it, especially with Ryan Murphy doing it and the cast that they had. But they had this great T-shirt that was just all the detrimental terms: sissy, fag, queer, everything. One of my favorite T-shirts now, and they were selling it, at the. I have to get one.
What was it like seeing that play? Because it opened in the late 1960s, but also before Stonewall happened. Mm-hmm. So what was it like in the theater watching it? Did it feel like it was a mixed crowd? Was
this
it
time or that time?
The first time, was it mostly a queer crowd, or what was the energy?
It was off Broadway. It was queer. I was kind of a tramp at the time, and I was in New York. Okay, so afterwards, we had seen the play, which I really enjoyed because it was my first gay, my first queer theater piece, and I'm like, okay. But then we went to the Village afterwards, and the trucks beckoned to me across the way. So I toddled over there and ran into one of the cast members. So
Nice.
It was really kind of, oh wow, I'm getting all the perks of going to this, theater tonight. And it was really moving. The lines, even the term, because at the time a lot of people hated themselves. It was internal homophobia,
Mm-hmm.
and that was really showing. And I thought, people were with the latest one now. People, oh, that's dated. That's never. It's not going to play well. It's going to be terrible. And it was absolutely amazing. Very mixed crowd.
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of people that brought their parents to show them what was on. They didn't change the scripts hardly at all. It was basically verbatim to what I had seen 50 years prior. And one of the best standing ovations I've ever seen in Broadway theater.
Yeah, that's interesting that people think it won't play well or that's dated, because even though certainly laws and even some social norms have changed since the time the play was first written and produced, I mean, I think there's still a lot of self-hatred with some queer people, or even just this idea to fit into a more, quote unquote, respectable way of being queer. And I feel like we see those battles happening right now, whether it's the Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence and the Dodgers, or, gay-friendly merchandise at Target that's getting pushed out, or Starbucks that's now not having Pride memorabilia in their stores. So
I heard that. It really surprised me. Yeah.
Yeah, but there's still this tension between being oneself and being the kind of person that society thinks we should be, even if they know that we're gay or queer.